She pushed me overboard, in front of 400 guests, while the man I once called my husband stood there and watched, champagne glass in one hand, smirk on his face. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. The sea was cold, but not as cold as their cruelty. They thought that was the end of me. But then I heard a splash. A man had dived in, not to mock me, not to save face, but to save me. His name was Marco Bellini, a billionaire, a ghost among the elite. And 2 years ago, I had saved his life without knowing who he really was. Tonight, in front of the same people who laughed at me, he carried me out of the water and asked me to marry him. My name is Clara Monroe. I built my ex-husband's empire from scratch. They erased me like I was disposable, but they forgot one thing I don't break. I rise. Have you ever stood silent while the world tried to humiliate you? Would you walk away or let them burn on their own lies? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you're ready for a story that turns pain into power. I was never supposed to belong on that yacht. Not to them. Not to the glittering crowd with their heirloom diamonds and inherited surnames. But once upon a time I was part of that world, or at least, I thought I was. My name is Clara Monroe. I'm 30 years old. And 8 years ago, I met a man named Jason Huxley. We were both nobodies back then. He was fresh out of a failed startup, still living in a studio apartment above a pawn shop in Seattle. I was working 2 jobs and sleeping on my friend's couch, trying to pay off community college while pitching small-time marketing gigs just to keep my resume alive. But when we sat down at a tiny cafe to talk about an idea he had for a fintech platform, something clicked. Not between us romantically, not yet, but intellectually, like 2 puzzle pieces that had been waiting for each other. I believed in him before the investors did, before the suits and boardrooms, before the luxury watch and the tailored suits. He was nervous, shaky, unsure. I was steady. We worked late nights together in his tiny apartment. I wrote pitch decks, designed early mock-ups. He'd stammer through calls I'd jump in to land the deal. And slowly Huxley Capital was born. 6 years. 6 years of grinding, traveling, failing, fixing, trying again. 6 years of building something real. Along the way, we fell in love. Or at least, I did. We got married in a courthouse. No guests, no flowers. Just the 2 of us and the hope that everything we were building, both the company and the marriage, would last. It didn't. Because in year 6 she showed up. Her name was Selena Crown. A model with 1 million followers and a last name that opened doors. She came in as a brand ambassador for one of our product launches. Jason was mesmerized. Everyone was. And I was invisible. I'd walk into meetings and feel the air shift. Selena would laugh and touch his arm, and I'd sit quietly in the corner. The woman who built the engine now reduced to watching it drive off without her. Then came the whispers. Jason needs a more dynamic partner. Clara's too. Simple. And then came the texts, from blocked numbers, cruel messages, photos of Selena in my old chair, mocking my clothes, my silence, even my body. I miscarried at 5.5 months, alone. Jason's response, maybe it's for the best. You were always more focused on work anyway. He didn't come home that night. 2 weeks later, I signed the divorce papers. Took nothing, not the stock, not the apartment, not even the shares I'd earned through sweat and sacrifice. I packed 1 suitcase, moved to Portugal, started over. I opened a small bookstore near the coast, painted the walls myself, stocked the shelves with poetry, old maps, and translated classics, served espresso to strangers, breathed. I told myself I was healing. But then 2 months ago, I got an email, a formal-looking invite, from Jason's assistant, to a networking event on the Amalfi Coast. The location, the Astrid V, Jason's newest yacht. 400 feet of floating marble glass and excess. I almost deleted it. But I didn't. Not because I missed him. Not because I wanted to belong. But because part of me needed to look him in the eye one last time. To show him I didn't vanish. That I was still here, still standing. I chose a simple white cotton dress. $15, worn canvas shoes. No makeup, no designer bag. Just me. I thought I was walking into a goodbye. I didn't know they were planning a public execution. The moment I stepped onto the deck of the Astrid Phi, I felt it. the tension. The attention, not admiration, not surprise, but something sharper. Like the way a room pauses when someone walks in wearing the wrong uniform. Their eyes didn't see me as a guest. They saw a disruption. I walked past the bar. A string quartet played something elegant. Crystal flutes clinked. Conversations murmured with the rhythm of old money. The deck glistened in the afternoon light, and I stood there just a woman in canvas shoes and a cotton dress. Selena spotted me first. Her red gown clung like a second skin. Her diamond earrings caught the sun. She tilted her head, smiled like a snake, and said loud enough for the nearest circle to hear, "Oh my God, who let the maid on board?" A few people chuckled. Most just turned. Then came Marcus Tate, a real estate heir I'd met once years ago during a pitch. He raised his glass toward me. "Clara Monroe. Wow, here to collect your alimony check." Sweetheart laughter rolled across the deck like thunder on calm water. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't return the smile. But the performance was just beginning. The crew joined in. A waitress dropped a napkin at my feet. "Here," she said, her voice bright with poison. "Make yourself useful." A deckhand leaned against the railing and laughed. Selena whispered something to a passing server who glanced at me and smirked. I recognized the tactic. I'd seen it before in foster homes and high school cafeterias, even in certain boardrooms. Isolate the target. Mock them until everyone joins in, because no one wants to be the one defending the outcast. Selena had planned this. She'd orchestrated the invitation, probably begged Jason to let me come, just to parade her power in front of the elite. And Jason, he stood near the bar. Watching, no surprise, no shame. Just that same lazy practice smirk I remembered from the day he told me I was holding him back. I thought I was prepared for it. But nothing prepares you for the slow, methodical erosion of your dignity broadcast, like entertainment. An influencer took a photo of my shoes, posted it to her followers with the caption, "Valerian Vibes Thrift Store Edition." 40,000 likes in minutes. Someone called out, "Hey Clara, did you sew that dress from a curtain?" A burst of laughter followed. I could feel the shame swelling in my throat, but I swallowed it. Flashbacks came sharp and sudden. Age 14. Portland foster home. The head matron holding my sketchbook over the trash can. "Don't waste your time dreaming. Girls like you don't get to be anything." I'd spent years fighting that voice. Now on this boat it echoed again in every whisper, every chuckle, every glance. Selena walked past me, her perfume thick like a weapon. She leaned in close. "You can leave now," she whispered, lips barely moving. "No one wants you here." I didn't answer. Didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. But something inside me shifted. Not rage, not yet. Just a deep, coiled stillness. They thought I came here looking for closure. They were wrong. I came to show him I was still standing. But what I didn't know yet was that they weren't done. And when they finally made their move, it wouldn't be with words. It would be with a shove and a fall that changed everything. I should have left the moment she touched me. Selena's hand grazed my shoulder as she passed again, her voice syrupy and sharp. "You really wore that in public, bold." She dropped something into my palm, a ring, my wedding ring, the one I'd handed back across the lawyer's table, the one I hadn't seen in 8 months. "Oops," she smirked. Must have slipped out of my clutch. A circle of guests turned to watch, phones out. Paparazzi drones hovering overhead. This was their spectacle. Jason stood just behind her, sipping champagne like it was water. "Clara," he called out, raising his voice. "Don't embarrass yourself." I didn't respond. I looked at the ring in my hand. The same ring I'd worn when we signed the first seed investor. The one I'd kissed when I saw 2 pink lines. The one I left behind. When he chose her. Now here it was, returned to me like a dare. Selena leaned in, lips near my ear. "Pick it up," she said, even though it was already in my hand. "Crawl if you have to." The crowd howled. Someone clapped. Another raised a glass and toasted to old flames who can't let go. And then before I could move, she pushed me. No warning. One firm shove between the shoulder blades. And I went over. Silence hit first. A long, stretched kind of silence that only comes after a crowd gasps in unison. Then the cold. The ocean swallowed me in a second. Salt stung my eyes. My ears roared. My dress tangled around my legs. My lungs panicked. But I didn't scream. I didn't kick wildly. I let the water hold me for a moment. It was quiet here, peaceful in a strange way. Up above, the music stopped. The quartet faded mid-note. Voices murmured unsure. Drones blinked red lights against the afternoon sky. I opened my eyes underwater and stared at the shimmer of the surface. Blurred figures leaned over the railing pointing. And then a shadow broke the light. Something cut through the water fast. Strong arms, a flash of black fabric, a body moving toward me with purpose. Before I could process what was happening, a hand grabbed my waist. Another cradled the back of my neck. And just like that, I was rising, breaking through the surface into noise gasps, flashbulbs. And him, Marco Bellini. I recognized him instantly, not as the billionaire, not as the ghost-like financier behind half the banks in Europe, but as Luca. That was the name he'd used 2 years ago when I found him half buried in flood debris in Morocco. He was volunteering, hiding from the world. I was coordinating aid supplies. He'd been quiet, distant, guarded. But when he fell from that collapsed bridge, I was the one who pulled him back up. He never told me who he really was. He left a note on a coffee-stained postcard. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." I never saw him again. Until now, Marco lifted me effortlessly, carried me out of the water like I weighed nothing. His black shirt soaked, his shoes gone. He climbed back onto the deck. The crowd parted in silence. He laid me down gently, took off his coat and wrapped it around my shoulders. His hand found mine, and then he turned to them, to the influencers, the executives, the heirs, Jason, Selena. "Who did this to her?" he asked. The words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than any scream. No one answered, because in that moment they realized this wasn't a woman they'd thrown away. This was the woman who'd once saved a life. And now, that life had come back to save hers. Marco didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call security. He didn't make threats. He just stood there, soaked, silent, and somehow more powerful than everyone on that deck combined. His eyes swept across the crowd. Aubrey froze. Jason paled. I was still sitting on the teak deck, shivering beneath Marco's coat. My hair clung to my cheeks. Salt water stung my eyes. My cotton dress soaked and clinging to me like second skin seemed completely out of place among the designer gowns and custom tuxedos. And yet, for the first time all night, they looked out of place. Marco spoke again, this time quieter. "You mocked her," he said. "You laughed as she fell." He turned to the staff, to the crew that stood by while this happened. "Every contract with Bellini Global's fleet is terminated, effective immediately." A hush fell over the yacht. The head steward blinked. "Sir, we were following. You chose cruelty over courage," Marco interrupted. "And in my company, that has consequences." He pulled a phone from his inner pocket, passed it to his assistant who had just boarded the yacht. She opened an app, showed it to a group of executives nearby. Crew names, termination status, confirmed. Mia, the stewardess who had mocked me, staggered. Her hands trembled as she peeled off her name badge. The deckhand who threw a napkin at me looked like a child caught cheating. Then Marco turned to the influencers. "Your posts mocking Clara," he snapped his fingers once. A screen mounted near the DJ booth flickered on. Footage from drones and live streams compiled, showing their captions, their laughter, their words. "Thrift store disaster." She probably crawled back for a handout. "Valerian V's fashion flop." Marco didn't say another word. He just nodded at his team. A list of agencies appeared. Major fashion brands, talent reps, modeling firms. Next to the influencers' names blacklisted. Effective immediately. Someone screamed, someone cried. But Marco wasn't finished. He turned to Jason, and for a second I saw fear in Jason Huxley's eyes. "You betrayed the woman who built your empire," Marco said, his voice low. "You sold your soul for PR stunts and parties." Jason laughed nervously. "Marco, this isn't your fight." Marco stepped forward. "No, it's not. But she saved me once, not because she knew who I was. Not for headlines. She saved me because that's who she is." He looked down at me. "You pulled me out of a river in Morocco. I never forgot. I spent 2 years searching for you. And when I saw you fall today, I knew I had to jump." He knelt on one knee. Right there, in front of everyone. Not to prove anything, not to humiliate Jason or Selena. but because that moment was about truth. Clara Monroe, he said, you reminded me what decency looks like in a world obsessed with power. Will you let me walk beside you for real this time? No titles, no games, just us. Gasps rippled across the deck. Phones trembled in hands. But I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at him. And suddenly the weight of everything, the years I gave away, the loss I carried, the silence I wore like armor, felt lighter. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I stood up, slowly, my legs still shaky, my breath shallow. I turned to Jason. I didn't say his name, didn't scream. Just this: you watched them laugh while I bled. And I stayed quiet because I thought I had to earn your love by being small. I paused, but I know now I never needed your love. I needed my own. Then I turned to Selena. She clutched the railing, her perfect lips trembling. I looked her dead in the eye. You didn't win, I said simply. Because what they tried to do wasn't about stealing a husband or money or a ring. It was about erasing me, and I was still here. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I didn't need a microphone, didn't need a press release, or a legal team. All I had was a soaked dress salt still in my hair, and the man who saw me really saw me kneeling by my side. And somehow, that was enough to make an empire crumble. Jason stepped back, his face pale, his champagne flute trembling just slightly in his fingers. Then Marco turned to him, his voice calm, too calm. Huxley Capital's partnership with Bellini Global is dissolved as of this moment. My board has already pulled our $3.2 billion stake. A gasp, then whispers. Phones buzzed as the news hit the financial wires in real time. Jason blinked, looked at his phone, saw the red arrows, watched as his company's stock dropped 18% in the span of 30 seconds, then 22%. A few board members near the back of the deck turned their backs to him. One of them whispered, "We warned you about her." Jason didn't argue, because what could he say? He didn't just lose a woman. He lost the foundation of everything he'd built. Selena stumbled. Her mask of poise cracked wide open. The press had turned. The guests were whispering not about her gown or her Vogue cover, but about her shove. A screen lit up again behind us, playing the drone footage of me being pushed into the water, of her laughing. The hashtags started appearing. Shachak, justice for Clara. She rose. Har, dignity is power. Then came the brands. One by one, Selena's agency names appeared on screen, each followed by a red stamp terminated. Her modeling career was over. Just like that. And she knew it. Her voice cracked. It was supposed to be funny, she whispered to no one. It wasn't supposed to go this far. But it had. Because cruelty always thinks it's clever until the world watches. Then came the investors, the ones who laughed, who posted, who snickered about my dress and mocked my bookstore. Marco turned to them, voice still steady. "You called her business worthless," he said. "You called her small." He took out his phone, clicked play. A short video began. My bookstore in Lisbon. Walls covered in murals painted by artists I'd mentored. Children reading poetry aloud. Refugees I'd hired as staff. Then a voice. A woman trembling, tearful. She gave me my first job when no one would. I was homeless. She treated me like a sister. Clara Monroe didn't just open a bookstore, she saved lives. The crowd watched stunned. Then another video. This time from Morocco. A village elder recounting how a woman named Clara helped coordinate relief during a flood. She waded chest deep through mud to bring us water. She asked for nothing. We didn't even know her full name. Now they did. And suddenly the woman in the thrifted dress wasn't a failure. She was a force. Marco turned back to the investors. "Your funds are blacklisted from all Bellini Global portfolios. Effective immediately." Gasps. A few investors' assistants began frantically making calls. Victor Crane, a hedge fund titan who had laughed earlier, dropped his phone. His hands shook. "Marco, please," he said. "You had a choice," Marco replied. "You chose mockery. Now you live with it." Victor's eyes darted toward Jason, who had retreated to a corner of the deck. No one moved to follow him. Selena leaned on the railing heels, wobbling. She tried to reach Jason's arm, but he pulled away. For once he looked at her with the same coldness he'd once turned on me. "Get away from me," he muttered. Then he walked. Not toward me, Not toward redemption, just away. The guest parted. He disappeared below deck, humiliated in the very world he'd tried so hard to climb. And all I did was stand still. One step at a time, the empire they built on lies was collapsing. Not with fire, not with revenge, but with truth and dignity. The only thing I had left when I walked onto that boat. 1 month later, I stood on the island where I'd once thought I'd vanish. Only now, it had a name. Isola di Clara, the island of Clara. Marco had renamed it without asking me. Not out of arrogance, but because he said the moment I pulled him from that Moroccan flood, my courage gave him back his name. We didn't talk much about that day on the yacht, not because we were trying to forget, but because it didn't need words. The world had already said enough. The bookstore in Portugal had become a foundation now backed by Bellini Global. We were mentoring over 200 young artists, former foster kids, survivors, outsiders, people like me, people who'd been laughed at, overlooked, pushed aside. Now they had their place. A home that didn't ask for designer shoes at the door. Sometimes guests would visit and ask why I never sued Jason, why I never dragged Selena through court. And I always say the same thing, because I didn't need to. Because some battles aren't won with noise, some are won by stillness, by standing tall in silence while the world tries to shrink you, by letting people destroy their own thrones while you build yours brick by brick from everything they said you couldn't be. Marco and I are building a life now, not on revenge, but on truth, on quiet breakfasts, on shared books, on holding hands without needing to prove anything to anyone. And if you're listening to this, maybe you've been where I was, mocked, dismissed, told your kindness made you weak, pushed down until you forgot how to stand. Let me say this, you don't have to scream to be strong, you don't have to fight dirty to win, and you don't need anyone's crown. You were already royal. You just forgot for a while. They threw me overboard thinking I'd drown, but I didn't. I rose, and I took the crown with me. What did you think of Clara's story? If you were in her shoes, would you have stayed silent or made them beg? Tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you believe dignity is the most powerful form of revenge, vote Posta Clara. If you're Team Karma, vote Hochenha Marco. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more real stories that make you feel and make you think.